For Oasis Audio, I'm Wayne Shepherd, talking with Jim Daly, the president and CEO of Focus on the Family. Jim's voice is heard daily on the widely syndicated Focus on the Family broadcast, but his real claim to fame for us today is that he's put together two great books, which we want to talk about. He's compiled these books using lots of friends and associations. And Jim, thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join me.
Yeah, Wayne, it's great to be with you.
Your books, published in print by Worthy Publishing and as an audio book by Oasis Audio, are The Best Advice I Ever Got on Marriage and The Best Advice I Ever Got on Parenting. Let's talk about the marriage book first. Where did the idea come from, Jim?
Well, my recollection, we sat around at Focus on the Family, and you know, the wonderful thing about sitting in front of the microphones every day with people that know what they're talking about is that you hear wonderful advice and you gain great wisdom just by doing those interviews. And I think at one point we just started kicking around that idea that what if we actually put some of these great ideas down into a book for people to get that best advice, both for marriage and for parenting. So that was the genesis of it. No one person holds all wisdom. I mean, King Solomon may have had that designation a long time ago, but I think we learn a lot from one another, and these are such great authors speakers, and so that was the idea.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking down the list of just the marriage book here. We've got Ken Blanchard and Andy Stanley and Paul and Terry Reeser, and there's Les and Leslie Parrott, and the list goes on. H.B. London's on this list as well.
Yeah.
So you know some pretty interesting people.
Well, Lee Strobel and Gary Thomas as well. So it's true. It's just one of the privileges, and I don't take that lightly. It's a wonderful thing to meet deep thinkers, people that have been not just the examples, but have actually lived through it. And that's the other element of the book that I love. These are practical confessions, really, and things they did well and things they could have improved on. And I love that freshness and that approach. We don't want to project a plastic or glass appearance. We want people to know that even those of us, yes, that speak about this all the time, struggle at times in our marriages and parenting our kids.
Mm-hmm. You're right, though, about being in a place, a nexus where people come together. You learn so much, don't you?
Oh, you do. And I think, for the fast pace that we all live at, to be able to have an owner's manual, the book that can help you. If people are going to read a marriage book or read a parenting book and need some instruction because they're struggling in those areas, this would be the book to get. Mm-hmm. And I'm hopeful that people will pick that up because we tried to put the most wisdom into just a few pages.
Yeah. Well, one of the common threads, I'm looking at the marriage book right now, and we'll talk about the parenting book as well, but one of the common threads I see is the vulnerability of everybody. Nobody's claiming to have it all together.
Well, that's because I think marriage does something profound for us, especially believers that understand the spiritual battle that we're in this natural life, and that is it beats our selfishness right out of us. And, if you understand the purpose of that actually when Jesus says to men, love your wives, the scripture, I should say, love your wives as Christ loved the church. That's a tall order, and unfortunately most men back up from that because that's impossible. I can never do that. But he wants us to try, and he wants us to do better each and every day. And so for us to be able to find handles and hooks and ways to express our appreciation and our selflessness toward our spouses, you know what? If you're doing that, you're doing a wonderful thing for your marriage, and you'll have a thriving marriage.
And since this is an audio edition, maybe it will reach a few more men.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. And there's an appetite out there. I'm so excited about the younger generation. I just turned 51, and we get down on younger people so much because they don't have the orthodoxy down fast. And that's important. It's important to know what it is you believe as a Christian. But you know what? Equally importantly is orthopraxis, the doing of the word. How do we put our faith into action each and every day? And, with the divorce rate, particularly talking about, again, marriage, with the divorce rate being what it is, not just in the world, but also in the church, we've got to do better. Not only for our own health and well-being, but also because they're testimonies before the world. And we're claiming Christ, and they're watching us. And when we divorce at roughly the same rate as those that don't even have a faith in God, it brings into question whether or not is there really a God. And that's not healthy.
Mm-hmm. Jim, this is a dangerous question because I know authors and people in your position have moved on and done 1,000 things since this book. But do you have a favorite story that was told or a favorite moment from the book from one of the contributors that just grabbed your heart?
Well, again, what I liked overall was the freshness of it and the way that people were vulnerable. Because a lot of times when you're getting the how-to books from the experts, Ken Blanchard is a great example. This guy's written New York Times best-selling books on leadership and other things. For him to be able to say, I at times have failed in this way, that's where I learned so much. You know, I didn't have a dad growing up, and people will say, where'd you learn how to be a good dad? 2 places. One, an example of what I didn't have, and then making a mental note or even a written note about what I want to be like when I'm married or when I'm a father, and then observing good behavior, those that could teach me something. And I think all of the authors demonstrate that as they participated in this project. Ken Blanchard, I think his story about commitment is one that really jumps out at me. And I don't want to disclose too much of it there, but he just really elevates the importance of commitment in marriage. When you have nothing left in relationship and you guys are upset at each other and it's so steep and so deep that you may not even be able to talk together, it's commitment to each other that's going to be that thread of a bridge that gets you to the other side.
Yeah.
And I love that illustration that Ken Blanchard gives.
You have to be willing to work at marriage, don't you? It doesn't just happen. Anybody knows that.
Oh, man. My wife and I are going through it right now on an issue, and, we're not seeing eye to eye on it. And, again, I think the beauty of this is that when we're vulnerable, when we're saying, you know what, we don't always do it well, but here are the tools that have worked for us. This is what got us out of our valley. Hopefully people will see that and be able to put those into use and improve their relationship. I'm tired of marriages simply surviving. Here at Focus on the Family, we're talking about marriages thriving. And that's what I want to see. People should be able to look into our faces when we go out to dinner as 4 couples, and they should see something different in that thriving Christian marriage where they're going, wow, what do they have that we don't have, Bob? So I that's what excites me about the material is that, like an owner's manual, again, if people simply read the great insight and the wisdom in these books, I think they'll be both better spouses and they'll be better parents. A good start to marriage is so important. That foundation has got to be laid, that foundation of commitment to each other and love for each other, so that when those differences do come along, and they are going to come along, then you've always got that foundation to build from and to relate to each other from. Oh, without a doubt. I mean, again, I think it's a cornerstone, and several of the contributors offered that bit of advice about commitment. H.B. London, who worked here at Focus on the Family for many years, he was a pastor for 35 years and then worked here at Focus for 20. He provided some wonderful insights. He called it the 10 communication blockers, and he said, one is being too busy. Well, we all suffer from that, don't we? We have to be intentional about carving out time, doing the date night, getting time away from the kids. Wall Street Journal, through the past summer, had an article about the graying of divorce, and it's a phenomena that's taking place in our culture today, where when the home becomes the empty nest, wives and mothers, for the most part, are the ones turning to their husbands saying, I don't want to stay married to you. And they have been so intentional about their parenting that they haven't developed and nurtured their marriages, and they're falling apart right at the point when their 19, 18-year-olds are stepping off into college or going out into a vocation, and they're looking back at home and seeing everything crumble, and they're forgetting the damage that they're doing. Why? Well, if we get right down to it, there's a lot of selfishness there. Yeah. Jim, we'll use this as the bridge to your book about parenting, because you made reference a moment ago to the fact you grew up without a dad. And for those who don't know, your own background and journey in life isn't the typical one for someone who's in the position you're in now, although I can see how it's equipped you to have the vision that you have. Just take a moment and describe that journey for us. Well, it was funny when Dr. Dobson and Don Hodel, who was Reagan's Secretary of Interior and Secretary of Energy, Don came in to help Dr. Dobson begin the transition process. And I'm sitting here going, okay, I graduated from Cal State San Bernardino. I studied at Waseda University in Japan. I mean, I'm proud of my collegiate activity, but I mean, I didn't attain anything like what these men had attained. Yet at the same time, what was so funny, in a way, it was a hard life that I lived, and what I like to say is that our testimonies are not our own. They're bought with a price, and that's the blood of Jesus Christ. And when we turn toward Him and He takes us through the valleys and to the mountaintops, and maybe sometimes back to the valleys, we have to realize and take comfort in the fact that God's in control and that He's working His will through our lives. And the sooner we can realize that, the better off we are. So there I was, walking down the hall with Don, and he turned to me and said, "Dr. Dobson and the board, we feel you're the guy to take it over." And I started laughing. I'm going, no, I'm not the guy. I mean, I am so imperfect. And then the Lord started working on my heart, and I started thinking about this. He gave me just about every family type to live in. I mean, it's so bizarre. I was in the normal dysfunctional alcoholic home. I then was with a single-parent mom. She remarried when I was 8 to a stepfather who was horrible. And then my mom died when I was 9, and our stepdad walked out on us. I ended up in foster care for a year. My biological father reappeared. I lived with him for a year. I was then the only one at 11, still under the age of 18. My other 4 siblings were out of the home then. And none of us thought it would be wise to stay with my alcoholic father, so I had to tell him I didn't want to live with him. Within about 4 months, he died. And I moved in with my brother, and I lived with him for 2 years. I lived with my sister for a year. Then my senior year, I lived on my own. And I mean, I laugh about it because I think back on that, and it was like the Lord, when this happened at Focus, it was as if the Lord said to me, Jim Dobson came from a strong Christian home with a loving mother and father. His dad took him hunting, and his mom taught him more about parenting than he ever learned at USC. But what he said to my heart was, "But you've lived everyone.
Yeah.
And you will know the brokenness of what so much of the culture is going through." And when I speak, that's what people walk up and say with tears. "I had your stepdad," or I love my mom and she died when I was young. There's so much pain out there. And I just want to say there is hope. There's hope in Jesus. And that's what we're trying to say to folks.
God never wastes a pain or an experience, does He?
Never. Never.
Well, you could write the whole counseling manual for Focus on the Family.
I don't know about that, but you know what? God's redemption is so complete, and if we turn to Him and stop worrying about ourselves and say, "Lord, how can I wake up every day and live for You?" I mean, that is going to be a life well lived, and one that the Lord, I think, will smile upon.
Well, then, let's talk about the second book that is in this series, The Best Advice I Ever Got on Parenting, because given that background of yours, this must be really very important to you.
It is. I think when you look at it, again, you look at what happens in the spiritual dimension and how that plays into the natural. Here the Lord, why didn't the Lord set up marriage to be like eHarmony, where, that perfect match is found, and they will never rub you the wrong way? Well, it's because, you know what? When you get married, God says 2 things. One, to women, respect your husbands. And I know that wives struggle with that because us husbands do things that don't deserve respect. But then God still wants you to do it. And then to husbands, love your wife the way that Jesus loved the church. I mean, wow. Those are heavy commands. And I think in that marriage sphere, he's talking about knocking off those selfish edges. Well, then kids come along.
Yep.
And they take any ounce of selfishness that's left. You wanted to play golf on Saturday? Guess what? You got to take the kids to soccer, and they got the birthday party. And if we approach it without animus, if we approach it without this sense of they're stealing from me, this is my time, I need downtime. Can we be giving? Can we be selfless like the Lord was for us? And for those few short years that you have your kids, can you concentrate on them? Can you make it a goal to do the very best you can? You know what? Get rid of TV. My wife and I made that decision 3 years ago. We got rid of cable because I was doing news, weather, and sports rather than sitting down and playing with my boys who are now 10 and 12. And I would say it was one of the best decisions that we made. Do I miss certain things? Sure. I miss news, weather, and sports. But, it's a small sacrifice to pay for healthy relationships with our kids.
Well, the list of the contributors to the parenting book is no less impressive. You start right out with some of my favorite people, Tim and Darcy Kimmel and Kevin Lehman and Randy Elkhorn and Fern Nichols, and the list goes on here. Again, just great people who aren't perfect, but boy, they sure know their stuff, don't they?
They do, and the same theme runs through the parenting book. And those are folks saying, you know what, we had plenty of missteps and plenty of problems, but we learn from it, and here's our best advice on parenting. And, again, one that jumps out, Tim Kimmel. I love his grace-based orientation.
Grace-based parenting, right.
Yeah, he's really struck on something here, and I think we need to lend an ear to it. And I think we certainly focus on the family, and what we have done here for years is talk about boundaries, which Kevin Leman reinforces the need for those boundaries. But at the same time, we've got to extend God's grace, because the kids are going to learn God's grace through the parenting that you do. And I have really tried to be intentional to express that to my boys, even in a moment of discipline where something has to be corrected. I've done my best to try to get down at their level, sit with them and say, this hurts me to do this, whatever it might be. Sometimes it's taken away a privilege, a toy. We're less and less in that zone of having to do a little something physically. But the point of all that is I love Tim and Darcy and how they explain that, especially for young parents that are so frustrated. And we need to just cut some slack and understand that guess what? We're sinners that give birth to sinners.
Well, before I let you go, how are things doing at Focus? Everybody loves Focus on the family, and you give such great leadership there. What's going on today? What's your vision for what's ahead?
Wayne, I appreciate that. I'm feeling better. We've had a tough 3 years, with the economy and transition. It's been a hard thing to endure, but the Lord is certainly gracious. We're still doing about 90% of the effort, even though we have 37% less revenue. And I think that's the Lord's multiplication factor. In 2008, our budget was $148 million. Now we're at $92 million. But we're stable, and I'm thankful to the Lord for that. And like I said, we're still doing 5 key things. Evangelism. Last year, over 82,000 people came to the Lord through Focus on the Family. And then in the area of marriage, 1.4 million marriages helped or brought back from the brink of divorce. In addition to that, almost 800,000 parents helped through a crisis with their child. Those are very powerful things, and they're all numbers, but there's a face behind each one. And those stories are profound. And for those that support the ministry, we share in that, and I love to say it that way. I think, as Paul talked about, that veil coming down. I would love it if the Lord would give us the privilege to see how somebody prayed, somebody labored, provided resources, and people working on the scene delivered a message that impacted the heart, that brought a family together, saved a family from disintegration, and actually that entire family coming to Christ, and then what they do from that point forward. I would love to see that in a beautiful mosaic that the Lord paints for us at that moment. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Someday you will see it. You know that.
I hope so.
You will, no doubt. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your work on these 2 books, The Best Advice I Ever Got on Parenting and The Best Advice I Ever Got on Marriage, transforming insights from respected husbands and wives and well-known moms and dads, all put together by Jim. Hey, thanks, Jim. God bless you. Anything you want to say in conclusion?
Wayne, I appreciate it, and I hope that, again, if you need a tune-up in this area of marriage and parenting, or you want to really learn from those that are out there every day trying to form from their own experience, from God's Word, those things that we need to do, these are the books. These are the books to get, and I would really encourage you to pick them up.
Yeah, and you just prompted me of something I thought of earlier, the fact that this is an audiobook with these chapters by these individuals. You can take this in bite-sized form, little devotion on the way to work every day.
I love it. That's the way I'm an audio learner. Most of my book consumption is done through audiobooks, so thank you for doing it.
All right. Jim Daly, President and CEO of Focus on the Family. And for Oasis Audio, I'm Wayne Shepherd.